For this week on Cyber School, as we ring in the new year, we're going to talk about low cost paging options and different ways to supplement or convert over a paging system. So that way you can use it while still being budget conscious. Because some of the biggest feedback that we get, as an IP endpoint manufacturer is IP endpoints are expensive, and designing a paging system and coming up, especially converting over and spending all the money that it can cost sometimes to switch to a new VoIP paging system, and then throwing a couple $1,000s worth of speakers and stuff on there can be kind of expensive. So hopefully today we can cover some different options and give some ideas and expectations as you're looking to upgrade your paging system, and you can kind of consider different, maybe lower cost or more economical options for paging. So first and foremost, of course, it can be pretty expensive as you go through and implement or upgrade a paging system. IP speakers on their own are definitely an investment, with some of ours, being, almost $500, $600 a piece. That's quite an investment in different technologies. So, as you're going and specking out, say, a new paging system for your facility, a school, or even a small business, you really want to consider what you're going to deploy, because you're making a big investment in it. So you want to make sure that you're making the right choices, but also being budget conscious. And there's a lot of different places that you can potentially save money with different networking equipment, and then as well as considering the different cabling that you might be deploying with the speakers, as there's a multitude of different options for cabling that's available now. So there's a lot of different places that you can either spend a whole bunch of money and really break the bank, or save quite a bit. So hopefully we'll cover a lot of that today. So in different ways of offsetting costs, there's a couple different ways that you can handle something like that. You really want to go and do your homework, do your due diligence, dot your I's and cross your T's as you're planning everything out, and make those, make kind of wise decisions and wise choices as you're planning, because that can really pay off with some big savings. Some of the first rules and guidelines that we always like to recommend is kind of determine your requirements and what you want out of the system. If you're doing, say, a like for like comparison, how does your system work today? And are you happy with it? Do you want to just do a like for like? Or would you want to split it up a little bit more? And some common talking points that we usually go over with customers is things like zoning requirements. Are you going to have specific areas that only need paging there, or would you want, say, paging in an all page configuration or multiple different zones? And determining the number of zone requirements can really help you flesh out and determine what kind of capabilities you're looking for. But then also, when you're looking at the different speaker endpoints, you want to look, is TalkBack actually required or necessary for some of the applications and the deployments that you're doing? Do you want that two-way communication through your speaker system, or would the phones in the different locations be sufficient for something like that? And also consider some different hybrid options if you have that kind of capability. If you've got an analog speaker system that's working today and there's no dead zones and everything's still functional, maybe keep that and supplement it with some IP speakers or different equipment in different areas. Maybe you've got an analog speaker system that works for the interior, but you've never had paging for the exterior of your building or a parking lot, and you can supplement that with different IP paging equipment. And consider some different options when you're dealing with your phone system as well. You've probably already got a candidate for the phone system that you're going to be switching to, but you can offset cost in some scenarios where in some situations, you might want a speaker for each individual office or classroom, but you can offset cost by utilizing a phone that's multicast capable as a paging endpoint and save some money there. If you're already going to be deploying a phone in a classroom, that can also double as a paging endpoint. And another thing to consider is different systems or platforms that are also going to support paging device extensions. Because with some platforms, you not only have to pay for the equipment and make that initial investment in the hardware, but then there's a reoccurring fee to continue to utilize that hardware on whatever platform that you happen to be using. So there's a lot of stuff to consider as you're as you're planning out a different paging system. And of course, if you've got an analog paging system that still works, keep it, because that's definitely going to be the biggest cost saving. If you don't have to rip everything out and replace it, there's no money that you have to spend there. So lots of different things to consider to offset costs. So let's go through some different options. The cheapest option, the most cost effective, is always going to be IP to analog. That's kind of keeping that analog paging system that's already working today and just bringing it forward and adapting it into your new current phone system. The nice thing about going this route is usually what we like to say is the quickest path to market. It's your quickest and fastest option because you don't have to rip out any of the speakers or any of the existing cabling from the amplifier to all the speakers. You can keep all that. And typically, you can deploy a single device to incorporate the entire existing paging system with something like a SIP paging adapter. You can go and incorporate that complete existing system and deploy a single device. So it's going to be your most cost-effective option because you need one device instead of many, and it's very easy to wire up and install a single device instead of planning and moving around different things. So that way you can get access to the ceiling to go and install a whole bunch of different speakers. As we expand and look forward a little bit, you've got your hybrid paging options. And this has been a really popular option for a lot of our customer base because a lot of the people that have paging, a lot of it is still going to work. The nice thing with analog speakers, kind of a detriment to a company that sells IP speakers, is analog speakers work for a really long time. As long as nobody's doing anything and, say, damaging the diaphragms of the speakers, or you're not getting any rats in your walls chewing on the cables, the speakers are going to work, the cables are going to work. So analog equipment can have a very long lifespan. And if it's still working and the coverage is still sufficient, you can keep that by going with a hybrid based paging system, kind of implementing what we talked about on our last slide there, and just incorporating some kind of IP to analog style device to continue to utilize that analog system, but then supplement that with IP devices where necessary. So in the initial example that I was referring to, you've got an analog paging system that works for the interior facility, say a warehouse, shipping department, what have you. You've got a paging system that works indoors, but you've never had paging for the exterior of your building. Or say you've got a louder area. Now you've changed over some of the machines and you've got, say a louder equipment. You can supplement that with visual notifications. So that way you can see that proverbial big blinky light on the wall and then be able to hear the announcements from the analog paging system. But a nice thing about going with hybrid-based paging is it allows you to transition into an IP-based paging system over time and offset the cost. If you've got that analog paging system that's still working, or you think you can get another couple years out of it at least, add in some IP speakers where you need it, upgrade that, and then down the line in a couple years, go and deploy a couple more IP speakers and slowly phase out that analog system. So that way you can offset the cost over several years instead of doing it all from the get-go. So then finally, as we get into our IP paging option, of course, with IP paging, it's going to have a higher cost potential just because of what you're dealing with. You're basically doing a full rip and replace. There's a lot of stuff to consider when you're dealing with an IP-based paging system because you're more than likely going to have to do all new cabling unless you already have Cat5, Cat6 drops to all your different locations. You're also going to need to consider the network infrastructure, the actual different PoE switches and network infrastructure that's going to actually power and provide the capability between and communication between all the different endpoints. And then all the actual endpoints are going to be the different consideration points that you need to think about as you're designing the system. It's not just, okay, I need all these different speakers and I get them in place and that's that. You need all the cabling to connect to it and all the switches or the PoE switches to be able to power everything. And with all of those different factors, costs can really add up pretty quick as you're going through and speccing out, say, 20 different speakers, 3 or 4 different switches, and a couple thousand feet of cable. The cost can really, really add up, but there's some different ways to reduce costs as you're going and looking at different things. So as you're looking at reducing the cost for different endpoints, really consider the type of Cat5 or cable that you're going to be using. There's a multitude of different variations of Cat cable now. It's kind of the common term to it, and they basically tack on a number as they increase the capability of that cabling. The standard cable that you'll use with most Ethernet-based devices, of course, our entire product catalog is going to be Ethernet-based. You can use a standard Cat5 cable, and you can get that as low as $13 a foot as compared to the super duper fancy cutting edge Cat 8. It's literally 60 cents a foot. That's super expensive. And when you compare that, yeah, of course, you can get that super bleeding edge, really fast, capable capable wiring. But if you're dealing with equipment, say like paging equipment, that might be dealing with at most megabytes in terms of data transfer, if you're streaming like high quality audio to the endpoint, you don't need that kind of cable bandwidth capability that you would get from a very expensive and fast cable like Cat 8. So Cat 5 is really going to be sufficient for a lot of our products. Then you want to calculate the actual PoE wattage requirements that you're going to need and buy switches that have a bandwidth that exceeds that by just a bit. So say, for example, you're deploying, I don't know, 10 speakers, and those are all PoE AF Alpha Frank, and those are 15.4 watt speakers. So get a switch. If you're getting 10 speakers and you need 15 watts per speaker, get a switch that's a 200 watts switch, and then you've got plenty of bandwidth for all the existing speakers and a little bit more if you had to add more. There's no sense if you need 10 speakers and a total of 150 watts going out and buying a 500 watt switch. You're wasting money unless you're planning on deploying a whole bunch more speakers in the near future. Buy a switch that's going to be close to the required wattage because you can save quite a bit of money there. And then finally, really determine what specific speakers you're going to be looking for. If you're going to be dealing with an all-page area, say a hallway or a big communal area where you're not going to need individual addressability, you can opt for a limited feature set speaker, such as a multicast speaker, and it's going to be a lot more economical and a lot more cheaper, save your pocketbook a little bit, compared to a full-fledged SIP speaker that's going to have a whole bunch more functionality, accessory support, SIP and multicast support. And if you're only going to be utilizing multicast to that, you're spending almost double the price on that as compared to a multicast speaker and getting relatively close to the same amount of coverage with it. So you can save a whole bunch of money by looking at the requirements of the specific area and picking a product that meets those minimum requirements. So that way you can go and save money wherever you can. And when you're dealing with that, you can really save a lot of money as you look at the different cabling, switches, and the speakers that you're going to be deploying. So at the end of the day, budget balancing is super duper important when you're dealing with paging. Of course, if your paging equipment is still working and there's no issues with it, keep using it if you can. That's really, a big investment that you made in the past. And if it's still working, keep using it. And you can adapt that into a new current system that you're moving to in terms of your phone system. But you can always supplement that as you move forward with different IP-based equipment. Again, if you've got, paging on the interior that's handled by an analog paging system, you can supplement that on the exterior with IP-based speakers and horns. Another good thing to consider is, of course, just determining the expectations and really set the system requirements before you go and pick all your products. You can go and see, wow, this speaker can do this and connect to that, and it can support a strobe kit and a clock and have a health check and do all these fancy things. When you're going to be deploying 30 speakers in an area, you can really blow your price out if you don't set your expectations on what you want out of the paging system and then pick your products. That way you're not getting blindsided with a whole bunch of super cool features. You can kind of tunnel vision on what you need for that area and save money. And of course, when you're dealing with cabling, as you saw, cabling can be extremely expensive if you go for the new, faster bleeding edge cable that's capable of very, very fast speeds. You need to think about the data rates of the equipment that you're buying. And if the equipment that you're buying doesn't need very fast connection capabilities, there's no sense spending the extra money on cabling. So that way you can go for basically the minimum requirement that you need and still have an awesome new paging system.
Thank you for watching this edition of Cyber School. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from Cyberdata.